Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. They said it couldn't be built. Until Earth unleashed Silent Doomfall. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the chief engineer of the Ving finished his presentation. His six-fingered hands gestured at the holographic display showing complex equations and simulations. And so, esteemed colleagues, I conclude that a planetary defense system capable of deflecting or neutralizing celestial bodies of class 5 magnitude or greater is simply impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed the total output of an average star system, not to mention the quantum instability issues we've documented in our 3-century study. The Vine's skin shifted from confident blue to a smug purple around the circular table. Representatives from 24 spacefaring civilizations nodded in agreement. The Orhan delegate, a being composed of crystalline structures, chimed in with a musical tone, "Our scientists concur, the laws of physics do not bend to wishful thinking. We should focus on early detection and evacuation protocols instead." Captain Jack Miller sat quietly at the human section. The newest addition to the Council, Earth had only gained membership 30 years ago, making humans the youngest species represented. He listened carefully, making notes on his data pad while the aliens discussed theoretical limitations as if they were absolute law. Miller was no scientist, he was a military man chosen to represent Earth because of his calm demeanor and diplomatic skills. But something about the dismissive tone of the older species bothered him. Humanity hadn't survived its turbulent history by accepting limitations. "Does the human representative have anything to add?" The council moderator, a tall, willowy being, turned its attention to Miller, standing up. Miller cleared his throat. "Thank you, moderator. Earth appreciates the detailed analysis from our esteemed colleagues. We will study your findings with great interest." He sat down without elaborating further. No need to reveal Earth's plans just yet, especially when those plans weren't fully formed. The meeting with General Powell didn't go well. The holographic projection of Earth's defense chief looked grim as Miller finished his report. "So they all agree it can't be done?" Powell asked, her weathered face betraying concern. "Unanimously," Miller replied. "The Vine were particularly insistent. Their civilization has been studying this problem for over 300 years. Powell's image flickered as she reached for something off-screen. "Well, that's inconvenient timing. I've just received the latest data package from Deep Space Observatory 6. Miller's stomach tightened. "How bad?" "It's confirmed. Object designation, Doomfall, is on a direct intercept course with our solar system. Initial measurements put it at approximately 300 kilometers in diameter, composed primarily of dense metals and ice. Current trajectory will bring it through the heart of our system in about 5 years. Evacuation plans?" Miller asked, though he already knew the answer. "With current technology, we could maybe save 10 million people out of 10 billion. Powell's voice was flat. "And that's assuming we get help with transport ships from the Council races." Miller leaned back in his chair, looking out the viewport of his quarters at the endless starfield. 5 years to solve a problem that apparently couldn't be solved. Send me everything we have on defense system concepts, everything, even the crazy stuff that got rejected. There's no point, Jack. You heard the experts, it can't be done. Miller smiled thinly. They've never met humans under pressure. 2 weeks later, Miller stood in a vast underground facility beneath the Olympusmans on Mars. Around him, Earth's best and brightest were assembling for what many already called a fool's errand. The room quieted as he stepped onto the small platform. No speeches had been prepared, there wasn't time for ceremony. "You all know why you're here," Miller began, looking around at the assembled faces. "In 5 years, an object large enough to end all life on Earth will tear through our solar system. The Galactic Council races have determined that stopping or deflecting such an object is impossible." He paused, letting that sink in. "Our job is to prove them wrong." A murmur went through the crowd. Miller gestured to his right, where a tall, lanky man with disheveled hair and a woman with sharp eyes and a determined expression stood. "This is Dr. Tom Reed, theoretical physicist, and Dr. Lisa Gray, material scientist. They'll be leading our technical teams. The challenge before us has never been solved by any species in the galaxy. We have limited resources, limited time, and, frankly, limited support from Earth's own government. Many of you were chosen because you've proposed solutions that were rejected as too radical or unlikely to work. Now's your chance to prove your ideas have merit." From the back of the room, a voice called out, "What if they're right? What if it is impossible?" Miller nodded, acknowledging the fear behind the question. The word impossible has an interesting history on Earth. Flight was impossible until the Wright brothers, splitting the atom was impossible until we did it, landing on the moon, curing certain diseases, instant global communication, all impossible until humans made them possible. He stepped down from the platform. We have 5 years to do the impossible. One more time, let's get to work. 3 months into the project, the first major test failed spectacularly. The energy containment field collapsed, vaporizing the test equipment and nearly breaching the facility's safety shields. "Well, that approach is definitely off the table," Reed said, reviewing the data as emergency systems cleared the smoke from the chamber. Gray nodded, her fingers tracing through holographic material analysis. The quantum fluctuations were even more extreme than predicted. No material we can fabricate could withstand those forces. Miller watched them from the observation deck, joined by an unwelcome guest, the Vine observer sent by the Council to monitor their progress. The observer made a sound like bubbling liquid, its version of laughter. "Captain Miller, my government appreciates your determination, but this effort remains futile. Perhaps now you will accept our offer of limited evacuation assistance." Miller didn't look at the alien. "The request is declined. We're just getting started." Later that night, as most of the team left, Miller found Reed still working, surrounded by floating equations. "Any insights?" Miller asked, offering coffee. Reed took the cup absently. "Maybe the traditional approach using energy shields won't work. We knew that, but what if we don't try to stop it at all?" "Explain." "We've been thinking about this as a wall to stop a bullet," Reed said, eyes bright with new ideas. "But what if instead we create a path of least resistance, a way to guide Doomfall safely around Earth using gravity itself?" Miller considered this. "Can we manipulate gravity on that scale?" "Not directly, but if we positioned enough mass at precisely the right points." Reed's voice trailed off as he began running new simulations for the first time since learning about Doomfall. Miller felt a spark of genuine hope, as humanity had done countless times before. They weren't accepting the impossible, they were redefining the problem. The race against time had truly begun. The Martian sunrise cast long shadows across the expanded facility that now sprawled across the red planet's surface. What had begun as a small underground base had grown into a complex of domes, testing areas, and makeshift living quarters. Earth's last hope was taking physical form. Tom Reed stood at the main viewport, dark circles under his eyes, watching as massive construction robots positioned the first full-scale gravity lens array. The structure looked deceptively simple, a series of concentric rings supporting what appeared to be ordinary metal plates. "Those aren't just metal, you know," said Lisa Gray, joining him at the window. She handed him a steaming cup of coffee. "Each panel contains layers of the new composite, billions of precisely arranged particles that can bend gravitational waves when energized." Reed nodded tiredly. "If it works, it has to work." She replied simply. Behind them, the command center buzzed with activity. Teams of engineers monitored construction progress while scientists ran simulation after simulation. Captain Miller moved between groups, checking status reports and offering encouragement where needed. The Vine observer, who had taken to calling himself Smith for the humans' convenience, watched it all with undisguised skepticism. "Your species continues to impress with its determination, if not its wisdom," Smith said as Miller approached. My government has analyzed your latest designs, they remain unconvinced. Miller shrugged. Then why are 3 more observer ships on their way here? Smith's skin rippled with surprise, a reaction he couldn't hide, merely scientific curiosity. Or maybe they're starting to wonder if we're onto something, Miller suggested with a slight smile. Your scientists have requested our material composition data twice now. Smith made no reply, but his skin darkened to a deep blue, the Vine equivalent of discomfort. 2 months later, disaster struck during the first power-up test of the gravity lens array. A calibration error caused a resonance cascade, the energy buildup tore through the testing grounds, destroying equipment worth billions and killing 2 engineers who couldn't evacuate in time. The funeral was brief, there wasn't time for extended mourning, but the loss hit the team hard. Reed took it especially poorly, locking himself in his lab for 3 days afterward. Miller found him there, surrounded by broken equipment and discarded calculations. The Vine were right, Reed said without looking up. We can't control gravitational forces precisely enough. The more power we add, the more unstable the system becomes. Miller leaned against a workbench. So, we need a new approach. Reed laughed bitterly. A new approach, we've tried 7 major design concepts already. Earth invested everything in this project, and I've got nothing to show for it but 2 dead colleagues. We knew the risks. Stop, Reed cut him off. Just stop with the motivational speeches. This isn't a movie where humanity triumphs through sheer willpower. Sometimes, physics just says no. Miller waited a moment before responding. My grandfather was on the first Mars colony mission. Did I ever tell you that? Reed rubbed his eyes. What does that have to do with anything? Their life support systems failed 2 weeks into the mission. Everyone said they were dead, no way to fix it with the supplies they had. The NASA director even prepared a speech announcing the tragedy. But my grandfather refused to accept that. He rigged up a system using parts from their space suits that kept them alive until help arrived. The mission that was supposed to fail became the foundation of everything we've built on Mars. Nice story, Reed said, but it's not just a story, it's how humans operate. We don't accept limitations when our survival depends on breaking them. Miller set the broken piece down carefully. Take a shower, get some sleep, then I want you to look at the problem differently. Stop trying to control gravity directly. Reed was about to argue when the door hissed open. Lisa Gray entered, holding a data tablet. You should see this, she said, handing the tablet to Reed. It just came through from that underground research team in Europe. Reed's eyes widened as he scrolled through the data. This changes everything. What is it? Miller asked. They've managed to create quantum entanglement between graviton particles, Gray explained. It means we could potentially create a distributed network effect. Instead of trying to generate all the force from a single point, for the first time in days. Reed's face showed a flicker of hope. A single lens can't handle the power requirements, but what if we built multiple smaller lenses that work together? The news from Earth grew worse each month. Public panic about doomfall led to social unrest, some religious groups declared it divine punishment, others formed end-of-the-world cults. The global economy struggled as people questioned the point of long-term investments. Meanwhile, the Martian facility became the center of unexpected diplomatic activity. The Orhan sent their own observers, crystalline beings who watched the humans work with growing interest. Even the reclusive Telari, masters of gravitational technology, dispatched a scientific team, they're hedging their bets. Miller explained to his team during a rare moment of relaxation in the base's small recreation area, no one believes we'll succeed, but they want to be first in line if we do. Speaking of betting against us, Gray said, nodding toward the entrance where a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit entered, flanked by security. Here comes trouble. James Wilson, Earth's Treasury Secretary, had become the project's most vocal opponent. He approached their table with a tight smile. Captain Miller, a word, please. Miller excused himself and followed Wilson to a private corner. The Security Council has voted, Wilson said without preamble, Project Doomfall is being scaled back by 60% effective immediately. Miller stared at him in disbelief. We're making real progress. The distributed lens concept is working in small-scale tests. We just need more money, more resources, more time. Wilson finished for him. The same thing you've been saying for 2 years now. Meanwhile, Earth needs those resources for evacuation planning. Evacuation is surrender, Miller said firmly, and it won't save most of humanity. Wilson's expression hardened. That's not your decision to make. You have 1 month to show concrete results, or we shut you down completely. After Wilson left, Miller gathered his core team. He explained the situation bluntly, holding nothing back. So that's where we stand, 1 month to prove this can work. The room was silent until Reed stood up with a strange smile on his face. You know what? This might be exactly what we need, budget cuts and a deadline. Gray asked incredulously. Reed shook his head. No, being forced to think smaller. I activated the room's holographic display, showing our current design. We've been trying to build something massive enough to affect Doomfall directly, but what if instead we build something small enough to deploy in large numbers? He manipulated the display, breaking their design into hundreds of smaller units, micro-lenses working in perfect synchronization across the entire solar system. Each one barely affects spacetime on its own, but together. Miller studied the new concept, hope rising in his chest. How quickly can we prototype this? Reed glanced at Gray, who was already running calculations. 2 weeks for the first test unit, 3 more for a small network demonstration. Miller nodded. Then we have exactly enough time to save the world. As the team dispersed to begin work on the new approach, Miller noticed Smith, the Vine observer, watching from the doorway. For once, the alien's skin wasn't showing skepticism or amusement, it had turned a deep, thoughtful green. Perhaps even the aliens were starting to believe. The prototype microlens hovered in the testing chamber, a deceptively simple-looking disc, barely 2 m across. It rotated slowly, catching the light and reflecting it in strange patterns that seemed to bend at impossible angles. Power at 20%, announced Gray, her fingers dancing across the control panel. The room hummed with energy as the device began to glow faintly. Reed watched the readings intently. Gravitational field holding steady. Quantum entanglement nominal at 30%. Miller stood back, arms crossed, trying to project confidence. He didn't entirely feel that 3 weeks of non-stop work had produced this first functional microlens, but they needed thousands to make their plan work, and time was running out. 40%, Gray called. The hum intensified. Smith, the representatives from 4 other alien species watched from behind shielded glass. Their presence no longer felt like skeptical observation, there was genuine interest now. 50% power, a small alarm began to sound. Reed quickly adjusted settings on his console, making minor fluctuations in the quantum field. Should we hold here? Asked Gray. Reed shook his head. We need to know if it can handle full power. Continue. 60%, the lens was now surrounded by a visible distortion, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but more pronounced. Scientific instruments around the chamber began to give erratic readings. 70%, the alarm grew louder. Reed's hands moved frantically over the controls, adjusting calibration. Lock it down, we can't risk damage this close to deployment. The system stabilized, but Reed's expression remained troubled as he examined the readings. What happened? Miller demanded. The power load is pushing the quantum entanglement to its limits, Reed explained. We can maintain stability up to 90%, but Doomfall will require 100% power, possibly more. An Orhan engineer chimed in, its crystals flashing with concern. If entanglement fails during the actual event, the entire network could collapse. Reed finished grimly. Miller looked around the room at the mixed team of humans and aliens who had worked tirelessly to build the impossible. Options were limited. After a moment of silence, Gray stepped forward. We need someone at each major cluster to monitor and manually adjust the quantum fields if necessary. That would mean positioning teams throughout the solar system. Reed pointed out, and if the system fails catastrophically, the implication is clear, anyone positioned at the clusters would be at ground zero if the gravitational fields collapsed. Miller straightened his shoulders. I'll take the primary control cluster. Reed, you coordinate from here. Gray, I ask for volunteers for the other positions, humans and aliens alike. Reed started to object, but Miller cut him off. This is what we've been working for. We take the risk together. As Miller left to prepare, Smith followed him into the corridor. My government has authorized me to assist at one of the secondary clusters, the Vine said. It seems I've developed what humans call investment in this project. Miller smiled. Welcome to the team, Smith. In the final days before Doomfall's arrival, ships departed for positions throughout the solar system, carrying the brave few who would manually monitor the network during its most critical test. News of their mission spread across Earth, uniting a planet that had grown increasingly divided as doom approached. For the first time since the project began, people dared to hope. Miller took his position at the primary control cluster orbiting the moon. From his viewport he could see Earth, still beautiful, still alive, in the opposite direction, though still too distant to see. As Doomfall approached, his communication console lit up with Reed's voice. All stations report ready, Captain. Doomfall enters activation range in 6.